just rush through a lot of gear. Just always
just buy
new
everything.
New stuff.
You could
new
do
stuff.
that.
Formula.
That's the other
Have
way.
7 things laying on the floor
Yeah.
and go
Yeah.
between them.
Yeah, it becomes a mess.
These guys recommend 5 things. I'll buy them all.
Buy them all.
So how many of you out there have assembled a headphone system? Raise your hand.
Yeah, many.
I think everybody watching, right? How about a 2-speaker system?
Yeah.
All right. Anyway, point is, what we want to talk about today is how the sound of the system is composed of the sum of its parts. I guess is the easiest way to say it. The overall sound is the sum of each individual component in the system, including this headphone.
Well, yeah, that's part of the system.
Yeah.
I would think that's intrinsically obvious, but curiously, you see people frequently talking online at a trade show or whatever about the sound of a DAC or an amp or something. How do you know if you're not familiar with the rest of the gear? And even if you are familiar with the rest of the gear, how can you be sure that's what that piece of kit sounds like?
Yeah,
I always thought that was curious.
Yeah, you got to be pretty good. I mean, that's tough to do. You got to be pretty good at
Very
it.
difficult.
You got to be pretty experienced. Like you'd have to have a pretty good subset of knowledge in your head of what everything sounds like.
And even still, sometimes like some components you need to change settings for other things. Like some things like hotter inputs or something, than others.
Yeah.
So you're like, you could change this to 6 volts out, and then it works better with this amp, or 2 volts, or some things clip.
Well, if you're running things at their limit,
yeah, well, yeah,
that like we found out, some people go, oh, this doesn't go loud enough, so it doesn't have enough power, therefore it sucks. It's like, well, no. Did you check the settings? Like,
You see that a lot, actually. I always thought that was curious. People crank the volume. They say it's not loud enough, so it sounds bad. And I think it's fairly well documented that usually people prefer louder. That's always better, right?
Well, that's the test.
So
how loud will it go?
If you're in a loud environment and you have the volume cranked and it's not enough for you, you're not going to like it. You're going to typically say that this isn't that great.
Especially if it's an expensive component. You're like, well, it should play louder because it costs so
louder.
much. But the reality of it is like, see, we're tricking ourselves maybe because when we do these shows, we set things up so you don't blow things up. So the levels might be down somewhere in the DAC or whatever. We purposely set things.
I know in New York we ran into this like 3 times some reason, and the volume kept going down on one of the iPads. So the output was low.
Yeah, why did
it was?
that
I don't know
happen?
why it kept someone must have been lowering. I don't know.
Oh, they went to adjust it on the iPad?
Someone must have been pressing it. Because it was like, this was working fine earlier, like all the way up on the volume.
Instead of using the volume, that's true. We got the newfangled style iPads, and they were upright this time. Usually you do them horizontal, and that button must have been in the perfect spot for people to just know that there's a volume.
I think it was
thing.
locked out in guided access, but I think maybe we weren't in guided access because of the Wi-Fi issues, and we were doing different things.
But man, that was like, what?
But see, these are things that people need to understand is that it's not just the volume settings, but all kinds of things change. Like we did videos in the past on a DAC being too hot into an amplifier or putting out too much level. Some of these DACs, nominal, the norm is like a 2 volts for single-ended or RCA, RMS, 2 volts output it means normally that's full volume. And 4 volts or so RMS for balanced is kind of been the norm. But in pro gear, that could get way up there for whatever the hell reason. And, and some of these DACs try to find a go in between. They'll put out 4 or 6 volts, and the amplifier is screaming, going, way too much coming in, and it distorts.
It's curious because you would think, well, it's the same connector. It's made for this. Why wouldn't I just plug it in and it's good?
You would think it would just work.
It seems like a rational thing, right? Yeah. But unfortunately, the standards are not that standardized.
When you
it's kind of like a little bit of a loose standard.
And then there's the opposite, true. Like you got some DACs that only put out like a less than 2 volts, or a volt and a half.
Yeah.
Then maybe they're made to work with their own amplifier, that manufacturer's amp. So now it's kind of a little quieter in an amp. So now the amp doesn't seem like it's as loud because the DAC is you can't crank the DAC up.
So one time I ran into the opposite in Denver, where we were using like an Orlick DAC, I think, and it was super hot. It was like we've never had a DAC that was that hot. It was going into a tube amp, and it 9 o'clock, and it was loud.
Right.
So it just seemed like this was the most powerful amp ever.
Yeah.
So people were like always shocked, they're like, oh, they might even use this amp before, and they're like, Are these headphones really efficient?
But that sets you up for a problem, because if you do turn the DAC up if it's put out too much, it will cause distortion.
Yeah.
And on some headphones, you won't even hear it. And on other headphones, it'll be like something's wrong with my headphone.
Right.
But it ain't. The headphone's just telling you got a problem in the system.
Yeah,
and
amps are the same way. Like some amps handle it okay.
Yeah, right. You could change an amp and it's no issue. Tubes tend to take higher voltages better because they work with high voltages, right? There's hundreds of volts driving them, so they tend to have a little more. They also don't clip the same as solid state, so they don't sound the same when you throw too much at them. They don't. Everything distorts differently when you throw too much at it. You can't even predict it. But see, that's the thing. Like, but let's get back to actually the sound of the system. Like, let's talk about like a properly set up system, right? That's what we need to talk about. Let's like we got the gear. We know the levels are good and all that stuff, right? Even then, if you try different DACs, different amplifiers, different cabling, different headphones, all this sets up for a totally different overall sonic landscape, so to speak, right? And
it's complicated because the system is indeed the sum of its parts. And you might think, I know the sound of the system because I know what it sounds like with my reference headphone, the headphone that I spend a lot of time with. But how do you know the sound of that headphone in absolute terms? Have you tried it on enough other gear to really be certain? And even then, is that enough sometimes? Because occasionally you'll get interactions that are a little bit different than expected. So to be absolutely certain what any individual gear sounds like is really quite challenging, in fact. And I would venture to say that it's not really even necessarily feasible to characterize one individual piece of gear to absolute certainty. You could be relatively certain. But to say, oh, absolutely, this thing does this or that, it needs to be pretty extreme for you to make that definitive statement.
Yeah.
And a lot of times you'll change your headphone, and now the sound may change slightly in a way you didn't expect because of maybe the impedance change of the headphone, the sensitivity. Maybe you're at a dramatically different gain or volume on an amplifier or something, which slightly changes the character of your system.
And to further that point, there's this thing called system synergy, which people bring up. Mm-hmm. People have done this where you talk about all these mixes of sound and stuff, and you ultimately find the perfect blend of the amp, the DAC, with your music and the headphone, and that's called system synergy, where you have a synergy with the speaker or the headphone, and it sounds to you about as good as it gets.
Well, I think like the best you could ever do is take a educated guess and it's a guess. You could guess at what you think what would sound good in your system or something. There's no way to be sure until you try it. Even if you're highly experienced, how many times are you like, I think I know what I need, and then you put it in, it's like, nope, that didn't do it. Yeah. So I don't think there is no absolutes in picking gear.
No, there really isn't. That's the issue is it's about your tastes too.
Well, that too.
What you want to listen to, how you want to hear it. So that's why there's so much choice. That's why you have such a selection in headphones. In gear is it lets you fine tune to your liking, and we see that in the market when you see people what they're using and stuff. It's all over the place. I mean all over the place.
Yeah.
Well, we're talking, it's from price, sonic character, how the highs sound, what they like about the highs, the mids, the bass. It's all over the place.
Yep. There's people that only care about bass, only care about highs, right?
Yeah, right.
It's like focus mainly
on that. Yeah, they focus on that, yeah. And they probably pick specific tracks to bring out that focus. So they're looking for stuff. I'm sure they have
a track that they're like, this is the one I always
That's what they always plan, yeah.
It's like, I love the drums on this, so use this track.
Yeah, when I was doing it for a while, you're probably going to have 15 or 20 tracks that you could rock through them pretty quickly. If you want to do a full range assessment, it's going to take more than one track.
Usually.
There's no one track I'm aware of that covers everything in the frequency spectrum when you're trying to assess a system. It's a combination of things. And so usually you will use certain tracks for certain things, at least if you've done this before.
Yeah, you do actually kind of need to do that. You need to have a multitude of tracks to really characterize the system well. Yeah. The fatal flaw that I see people doing, especially at shows, they think they know enough and they have a fair bit of experience. So they say, well, I'll try my reference track, my standard or whatever, and it'll characterize the system well. Or I'll try this headphone and it'll let me know what the system's doing. But inevitably, like everything, there's always the weakest link in the system that you may be unfamiliar or unaware of. So it doesn't necessarily mean a singular track is feasible to tell you all the strengths and benefits, because maybe it doesn't exaggerate certain frequency range or
something might stick out in tracks you're familiar with that you didn't hear before, with your headphone. And that's kind of a good thing, I guess. But, it depends. I mean, it could be the track. It could be you never really heard the track before. It could be that this gear that you're listening to is superior to what you had used in the past, and it is telling you or letting you hear something in the original recording that's there. So now let's say you shy away from that, right? You say, well, I don't like the sound of the mids on this track that I always liked, right? So now you're choosing gear that adjusts that mid-range character of that track, but really it ain't the track. You kept choosing the wrong gear, so you never get away from this problem. I don't know if it's a problem, but let's call it a fault, right? Where it's kind of like you're always going back to that thing. So you got to be careful. Basically, I think what happens is as you get more and more experienced, expect to find better tracks. You find when the stuff wows you, when you hear something you never heard before, keep that, make that a keeper, right?
Yeah, I mean, and then eventually have 10 of them.
Yeah, right, or more. Yeah, right.
What I find is occasionally you'll find gear that's exceptional at a genre or an album or a track or something like that, and you'll hear it and you'll be like, wow, this is the greatest I've ever heard this. But then you play something else and it's not that amazing. So why is that, right? Well, that's the trouble. It's really hard to know exactly why that's happening, because the system is more or less made up of all its pieces.
I mean, yeah, but that's why, this is the expensive way to go. But yeah, that's why people have 3 systems that are all specifically tuned. I use this just for this, and I use this one just for this.
This is my rock and roll system.
Right. Yeah, this is my classical system. Only play classical.
I appreciate having at least 2 amplifiers, tube and solid state.
It is the more expensive.
I've said that before. I've got the Woo W33 for rock and roll. It'll play anything, but it's got so much power. And it's crazy, and it's just got this openness. It just makes some stuff, older recordings sound better on headphones.
Maybe not the most practical, but effective.
Yeah.
And that is the issue, right? If you hear something and it sounds amazing, how do you know what's causing it? Is it one component? Is it all the components together? Is it the recording? Hard to know.
It's hard to know, yeah. And that's why it's fun to try different gear with your headphones or different headphones, and start to learn about the mix. It can get confusing. Don't do too many things at once.
Right.
My advice is, if you're going to change something, change one thing at a time.
Right.
It helps you build a picture of what's going on.
Or shit can a whole system. That's fine too. But one thing at a time. Yeah. Right. You want to build the picture.
You got to understand, maybe.
Right. Okay, I did this. This is what happened. Maybe write it down, because a lot of times you forget. You lose track after 5-6 pieces.
Yeah.
But keep track of it somehow. If you can't mentally keep track of it, you might want to write down keep some notes.
Yeah, it helps. You too. But you just had the same amp for years. That helps. It's the amp never changes.
Right.
Everything around.
And it's always worked for me well with those speakers or that headphone.
Yeah.
And it doesn't say that at some point it gets tired.
Right. But at least that's your rock, your reference point. That doesn't change.
Well, and that brings us to the main a main recommendation we could tell people on this whole topic is always second guess yourself. Always look back again and go, think about, just maybe try things a second time around a year or 2 later. Is it better than I thought it was, or is it worse? Go back to second guess. In other words, I don't know. See, if you don't know English, you might not. I don't know how another way to put that in a different language.
Reevaluate.
Yeah, right. Right. Always reevaluate yourself, your test methods, your listening, everything to make sure you're on the right track. Because I've seen a lot of people go off track, and it just takes one change somewhere, and you roll with it, and you get skewed.
Occasionally you see that. Yeah. Somebody makes a change, and immediately they think it's better. With time, they find it's not really offering what they want, and they keep seeking improvement. Yeah. And they end up going back to where they were and find out it's better than they ever were.
Sometimes years later.
Yeah.
It's I was there 5 years ago. Here I am again.
Or it's is it plugged in thing? After a while, just make sure everything's connected properly. We just ran into this in the show. Yeah. And it's someone's is these cables reversed? And he was right.
Yeah.
The left was in the right. I'm
Yeah,
like,
we get that all the
simple
time.
stuff like that.
Actually.
It's like,
You
I
would
don't
think
know.
it'd be straightforward.
Yeah,
But
we get that all the time.
I mean, you think it's pretty easy,
Yeah.
left and right, but it happens.
Well, I know, like the last show, we swapped out one of the pieces, and I don't remember who swapped it, but the cables probably got reversed on the swap.
Yeah.
You know, we had it right to begin with, and then someone else
Yeah.
it's always something like that. There's some weird reason why.
Yeah, you're moving stuff around, trying this amp over here.
Yeah, don't worry if the piano's on the wrong side. That's an easy fix.
Yeah.
Just go like that.
Yeah.
So anyway, just keep it in mind, everyone, you know, that when you're dealing with systems, it's complicated, and have patience with it. Give it time. When you're trying something new, let it sink in for a couple weeks, at least a few weeks if you can.
And if you can, go back to the way it was before.
Yeah, always
after you
go
got
back.
used to it.
Right. Yeah. Give it time. Don't try A-Bing every 2 minutes. That's maddening.
That's tough.
Yeah, that's mad. It's not going to work. You just get your nerves get to you. You just
Quickly. Yeah.
Yeah. Let it play for even a few days. You know, the experienced people know this. Let it play. You know, let it break in. Leave it on if you can. If it's solid state gear, let it stay warm. Let it burn in. The power supply capacitors, you know, they get if it's a brand new piece out the box, it's never been used. Things change a little bit. The electronics do break in. So, and then slowly assess it over time. And, you know, then, like you said, go back to what you had before if you can. And let that play for a day. Let your brain get used to that for a day. It's a slow process. It should be a slow process. You try to make it fast, it ain't going to work. You're going to make a bad call. Guaranteed every time. There's no high-speed way to do something subjective like this.
Well, I guess it's kind of like, it's always an automotive analogy. It's like going for a test drive of a car and then using it for a year.
Totally
right?
different.
That's a different.
Completely different.
On the day-to-day, you know.
You figure out when I hit this knob, it does this thing
right.
I don't like, or I can't see here when there's like the sun and all these weird nuances.
Well, that's true. Over time, it narrows down what what to look for next time.
Right.
Absolutely.
You get better.
You get in, you instantly go, don't like the rear view, don't like the window. You already know, or this is great.
Right.
This is way better. This is what I want.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. There's so many things that you learn from doing
Living
over a
with
long
the vehicle.
time. Yeah, totally. Over time.
Same thing with audio.
Same thing with audio. Yeah. Don't rush it because it's not something you want to rush. You just take your time, one thing at a time, change, see if it works for you.
Well, I guess you could rush, and then you just rush through a lot of gear. Just always
just buy
new
everything.
New stuff.
You could do
That's the other
that.
formula.
That's the other
Have
one.
7 things laying on the floor
Yeah.
and go
Yeah.
between them.
Yeah, it becomes a mess.
These
but-
guys recommend 5 things. I'll buy them all.
Buy them all. It's the easiest way to do it.
That'd be cool. Some people do on the used market.
Yeah.
I guess you
Build it.
could, yeah.
You could. But even in the used market, well, sometimes you got to wonder
Well, you got to deal with buying and selling.
how
Yeah.
how used is it? Like,
Well,
especially
yeah.
with tube gear, it's like,
Well,
now you don't know the tubes that are in it. What was stock
You
tubes
get it. The
versus
guy
somebody-
lied about it.
Yeah, the tubes are got 10,000 hours on them, and they're shot. It's dull or
Yeah.
something that makes funny noises. So you got to watch it. But usually with solid state, you're okay. But even then, time tends to
depends
wear
how old it
things
is, yeah.
out. Yeah, even with solid state. Yeah, so beware of that. So because a lot of people, I see that too. I should bring that up. People will get used gear, and who knows? Let's say it's 5-6 years, and it had great reviews back then, and I got it, and then so now you're using that as you're using what people said in the past for what it should sound like
Right.
today, and it
That's
may not
almost
be
another
accurate
video.
because in the past these headphones didn't. First of all, speakers and headphones like this didn't exist that long ago. So what those people said back then, they were using other headphones to listen to it, and it may have worked great with those headphones. The really, again, brings us back to the system thing. You'd have to recreate that system they used with it. If you want to know what that amp sounded like back 6 years ago,
and even then, though,
you got to recreate the entire system.
it's just like reading like Motor Trend from 1965. It's like, well, they were using this Mustang at the time.
Yeah.
And
with this gas.
Yeah, right. And you can't really even compare it.
Which they don't make anymore.
Like, if you compare it to a
tires are different and
modern
stuff, too.
restored one, it wouldn't be. It's not the same
Right.
as a
True.
factory fresh one.
Yeah, it was totally different.
So you can't even really compare a new one to.
I guess that's what you see guys that have the old cars. They try to get the old style tires for them too, right? They
Yeah.
want to feel the old style ride.
Right.
You know. Well, of course, with a Model A, you don't have much of a choice. You're not going to put slicks on it, but
But even then, is it really the same? Are the
Right.
rubber compounds identical?
Yeah, right.
probably not.
I don't know.
Probably
Yeah.
not.
Well, the roads are probably a little
Roads
better.
are different. too.
Those are different.
I don't know if they're any better in New York, but they're a little better.
Yeah. The materials are different. Yeah.
But yeah, we got some potholes going now. We got some deep ones coming in from all the cold, icy, salty weather chewing up the
Yeah,
pavement.
there's some bad spots right now.
Yeah, it's getting there. Let's hope for warmer weather.
Mm-hmm.
Summer's coming. Thanks everyone for watching. Take care.